over the weekend, it appears that Donald Trump has decided to revoke the legal protection status for over 500,000 immigrants. I think you may be surprised at who those particular groups are. But this wouldn't be the first time that Donald Trump has decided to roll back policy for Cuba. He also did this during his first administration when he decided to roll back Cuba policy that Obama had put in place. Let's take a look at that, a reminder of Cubans praising Donald Trump for his decision at that point in time. Ladies and gentlemen, let's get into this clip.
It's going to be a great day for Cuba. Thank you. Thank you very much.
In the heart of Little Havana, with a flick of the wrist, President Trump signing into law a new Cuba policy dismantling President Obama's attempts in normalizing relations with the communist island nation.
Effective immediately, I am canceling the last administration's completely one-sided deal with Cuba.
The new policy fulfills a campaign promise Trump made to the exiled Cuban community based in Miami. The Havana embassy reopened in 2015, marking a new relationship with Cuba, which was severed in 1961 during the Cold War. But on the streets of Miami, Cuban exiles and Trump supporters say they're opposed to any policies which legitimize the brutal dictatorship. This Trump rollback is what they wanted.
Fidel como Raúl.
Alvaro Alvarez fled Cuba after Castro rose to power. He says he hopes Trump makes more restrictions on the Castro regime.
Más restricciones.
More restrictions, he says, because that is how you combat them.
Well, that's really interesting. And you may be wondering, why am I talking about Cuba in particular when we get into this new policy that Donald Trump is now implementing? Cuban Americans are greatly going to be affected. So at this point in time, as you can see, that it appeared that Cuban Americans in Miami in particular were very happy with the decision that Donald Trump made. You do have to remember that it is not uncommon for some Cuban Americans to move away from any type of left policy because they don't want to go back to a particular regime in Cuba that was under Castro. So anything that some people may describe as socialism, I just describe it as universal policies. They may be against, thus that may make some of them more likely to vote Republican. And that'll be important when we get to this new policy revision.
The policy change will impact American travelers trying to visit Cuba.
People can no longer go individually as they were doing before. They have to sort of book a tour.
Policy experts say it's an attempt to deprive the regime of tourism dollars.
And they have to have a clear agenda to demonstrate they're not going down there to drink mojitos and hang out on the beach.
Trump's new policy will also restrict American businesses from engaging with their Cuban counterparts operated by the military. The reason, Trump said, is to punish the Cuban government for being oppressive.
Easing of restrictions on travel and trade does not help the Cuban people. They only enrich the Cuban regime.
But the new policy isn't a full reversal. It keeps some Obama policies intact.
Our cooperation on a number of fronts, including on human trafficking, the environment, Zika, port security, those are all going to remain, and he's not clamping down on some forms of tourism.
One Obama policy will remain unchanged. That is the ending of wet foot, dry foot, the Cuban Adjustment Act. And what it did was offer a path to citizenship for Cubans who made it to American soil, no questions asked. Now, the Obama administration ended that policy right before President Obama left office. President Trump's new policies will not bring it back. Josh Raplogo, The Associated Press, Miami.
Okay, that leads into Cuban immigration, and that's the story I want to get into tonight, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, this is very interesting, and I'm curious to hear how some Cuban Americans are going to feel about this particular change. It's very interesting as well because Donald Trump does have Marco Rubio as a part of his administration, who is also Cuban American. And many are starting to ask the question, like, where does Marco Rubio stand on this new change? And that new change is this. Donald Trump is ending temporary legal status for over 530,000 Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans. For this particular segment, I want to focus on Cuban Americans, and you'll see why as we get into this story a little bit further. Let's go into this clip here from South Florida News. Check it out, folks.
We're also following breaking news that could impact the lives of many people here in South Florida and across the country. The Trump administration is revoking the temporary legal status of more than 1 million Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, Venezuelans. That's according to a Federal Register notice. The reason given, the parole programs were deemed ineffective in improving border security and inconsistent with current administration policies. It goes into effect April 20th. The move could leave hundreds of thousands possibly facing deportation. As of now, there have been no comments from the Trump administration.
We're talking about over hundreds of thousands of people possibly being deported under this new provision here. And I want to get into the details a little bit further, ladies and gentlemen. Again, for the focus of this segment, we're focusing on Cuban Americans. And again, you'll see why when we get to the discussion about Florida. Trump revokes the legal status of 500,000 immigrants in the United States. So let's get into this, folks. Again, this kind of happened over the weekend. President Donald Trump's administration will revoke the temporary legal status of 500,000 people, including Cubans, Haitians, Nicaraguans, and Venezuelans in the U.S. The move, the latest expansion of Trump's crackdown on immigration, is effective from April 24th and cuts short a 2-year parole granted to the immigrants under former President Biden that allowed them to enter the country by air if they had U.S. sponsors. So this is set to happen in about a month, ladies and gentlemen. So this is going to be pretty quick. This is not something that's going to take a couple of years to implement, and it may affect people that you know. So again, if you are Cuban American, I want to hear how you feel about this particular provision here. A group of American citizens and immigrants sued the Trump administration for ending humanitarian parole and are seeking to reinstate the programs for the 4 nationalities. Biden launched the parole entry program for Venezuelans in 2022 and then expanded it to Cubans, Haitians, and Nicaraguans in 2023 as his administration grappled with high levels of undocumented immigration from those nationalities. Diplomatic and political relations between the 4 countries and the United States have been strained. The new legal pathways come as Biden also tried to clamp down on illegal crossings at the U.S.-Mexico border. Trump, who campaigned on a harsh anti-immigration line, took immediate steps to ramp up enforcement after taking office, including a push to deport record numbers of people who reside in the U.S. without official documentation. He has argued that the legal entry parole programs launched under the Democratic predecessor overstepped the boundaries of federal law, and he called for their termination in a January 20th executive order. His administration's decisions to strip the legal status from 500,000 immigrants could make many vulnerable to deportation if they choose to remain in the U.S. So this is interesting considering Cuban Americans are now a part of this. And again, a lot of people on social media are asking, okay, Marco Rubio, where do you stand on this? From what I understand, Marco Rubio supports this, right? So I'm not sure how the Cuban American community is going to feel about this. Like I said, this could impact some of their loved ones, some of their friends. And we also have to take into consideration how this will impact a state like Florida, not just for presidential elections, but also for those congressional races as well. Is it possible that Donald Trump, by implementing this move, could be doing the Democratic Party a favor? Something to think about there for just a second. It goes on to say here, I just want to fast forward a little bit here. It says on March 6th, Trump said that he would also decide very soon whether to strip the parole status for some 240,000 Ukrainians who fled to the U.S. during the war with Russia. So it looks like Ukrainians, you may not be safe either. Under a Trump-era policy implemented in January, expedited removal can be applied to certain immigrants in the U.S. for 2 years or less. In the meantime, Venezuela has reached an agreement to resume repatriation flights of immigrants from the U.S., the Venezuelan government said in a statement on Saturday. So, ladies and gentlemen, things are changing, and I don't think, I could be wrong, but I don't think the Cuban American community probably expected this from Donald Trump. Now, this is important because Cuban Americans, especially in a state like Florida, are more likely to vote Republican. As I said before, they're less likely to support these left-leaning policies because they don't want anything that can come close to what Cuba had under Castro. So they tend to be more likely to vote Republican. So what does that mean for the state of Florida? Is it possible that if these deportations take place, that we could be looking at Florida possibly becoming a swing state yet again? Let's look at how Cuban Americans voted in the presidential election, how the Hispanic vote helped a red wave sweep through Florida. So this is important to take in here, ladies and gentlemen. I just want to jump forward a little bit here. It says we have to look beyond comparing two candidates. There are broader trends that have shaped the Latino vote. It goes on to say here, Cubans have escaped a communist regime. And for Cubans and the Cuban Americans, the dramatic shift of the Democratic Party to the left concerns everybody because it reminds them of what happened in Cuba back in 1959. Now, of course, I'm going to push back here. The Democratic Party is not shift to the left. If anything, especially under Kamala Harris's campaign, they shift further right. And I am not implying that the Democratic Party is communist, but I am implying that it has moved significantly to the left. This is false. This is by far not Bill Clinton's party, and there are way too many signals that concern the Cuban American community and essentially push them to the right, to the Republican Party. So check out how people voted. In a poll conducted in an October survey, it says more than 600 Florida voters that illustrated Hispanic voters in the presidential and Senate races were leaning towards the Republican vote. But what about younger progressive Cuban vote? That has been a fascinating development. Goes on to say, let me make a clarification first. Cuban Americans, those born here in the U.S., tend to be more equally divided between Republicans, Democrats, and independents. So that narrative of more liberal Cuban American community is now outdated. Now that narrative was true for those coming in 1994 to 2015. There was a narrative, a trend in the polls back in those years indicating that the new arrivals tended to be more willing to engage with Cuba. Goes on to say that what happened there, the way the Cuban government reacted to that opening, demonstrated without any question that the idea of engaging with Cuba was better than sanctioning the regime was a mistake. And especially those Cubans that had just arrived here recently and had the hope that the engagement would work better became so disappointed in engagement that they moved dramatically to the right. So the poll reflects that 32% of voters across the state, regardless of race, said that the economy was the most influential issue in this presidential election. And 48% of Hispanics said their financial situation is worse than it was 4 years ago. So that's something to take into consideration. If we look at the FIU's Cuban research poll, it found that the approval rating for Trump among Cuban Americans was the highest ever at 68%. The 2016 poll registered 35% approval for President Trump, while the 2020 came in at 59%. According to the poll, 2024 approval rate is also greater than the actual Cuban American vote for Trump in the last two presidential elections. So this is something to consider, ladies and gentlemen. If these deportations happen for Cuban Americans, what does that mean for the state of Florida? Is it possible that Florida could possibly become a swing state yet again? The last time a Democratic presidential candidate was able to win Florida was Barack Obama in 2008. And I want to show you how that went. Here's a message that Obama had when he spoke in Florida.
We're in the middle of the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. 760,000 workers have lost their jobs just since the beginning of this year. Businesses, I'm going to tell you what we're going to do. Businesses and families can't get credit. Home values are plummeting here in Florida, you know what's happening in terms of foreclosures. Pensions are disappearing. It's gotten harder and harder to make the mortgage or fill up your gas tank or even keep electricity on at the end of the month. Just today, we learned that the gross domestic product, a key indicator economists use to measure the health of our economy, has actually fallen for the first time this year. That means we're producing less, we're selling less. Our economy is actually shrinking. Florida's in its first recession in 16 years. Across the country, we saw the largest decline in consumer spending in 28 years, as wages fail to keep up with rising costs of living, and folks have to watch every penny, tighten their belts. Now, all this didn't happen by accident. Our failing GDP is a direct result of a failed economic theory, of 8 years of trickle-down, Wall Street first, Main Street last policies that have driven our economy into a ditch.
Yeah, and unfortunately, things didn't get that much better under Obama. I mean, it did improve some, but Barack Obama filled his cabinet with Wall Street cronies. So again, he ran on a great message, as you can see there. It says change we need. For the younger people watching this show, Barack Obama, a lot of us came out to vote for him in 2008. And this was during the housing crisis. So there were a lot of people that were affected. The economy was really bad. I remember all of this. I was working 2 jobs in 2008. But that was Obama there speaking to people in South Florida. That was right before he went on to win the presidential election. In 2012, when Barack Obama ran for re-election, he lost that state. Florida has not been blue in a presidential election since Barack Obama 2008. And I would argue that's because Barack Obama did not fulfill the promises that he made on the campaign trail to the working class. But if these deportations go through and Donald Trump does deport Cuban Americans, we could be possibly looking at Florida becoming a swing state again. What do you think about that? If you're Cuban American, I'd love to hear from you. My email address is located in the description box of all of my videos. Reach out to me. How do you feel about this? I'm curious. Hey guys, this was a Sabby clip. If you like what you saw, hit that like button and subscribe.